Algorithms are finicky bastards, and so even if you're subscribed to me, even if you've clicked the bell and gone through all the other rigmarole, even if you follow me on social media, you might not see what I'm up to. So I have a mailing list. Postmortem-studios-fan-group, which is a bit of a mouthful, but all you have to do is navigate your way there once at groups.google.com and subscribe, and then once a month you will get an email with everything that I've done in the previous month, and isn't that special?
Hello lovelies, today we're looking at Degenesis again, and we're looking at the Artifacts book. And if my fingernails aren't clean enough for T-shirted historian, tough. I scrubbed them clean 10 minutes ago, and I have oily skin. There's, what are you going to do? Not much, as it turns out. Okay, so you would think that an artifacts book would be full of artifacts, and to an extent it is, but there is a lot more to this book that has nothing to do with artifacts, so it is perhaps misleadingly named. A lot of my commentary is going to be largely the same as that I have given for others in the Degenesis series, and things that I think contributed to their downfall. So I may not have a great deal to say about this book, because I would just be repeating myself, unfortunately. So yeah, these books are very pretty, the layout is very nice, it can make it somewhat difficult to read, the translations aren't particularly great, there's a lot of choppy sentences, and there's a lot of bloviating around the actual material that you want to get to. Now, this being a book that at least partially is about items, artifacts, doodads, and widgets, you have less of that. But it's not devoid of these problems. There's a whole bunch of additional rules that don't really necessarily have anything to do with artifacts. This is a set of legacies, which are additional sort of background tweaks and tunings to your character that you can choose from. They have certain prerequisites, they give you certain bonuses, but they also give you certain drawbacks. So you can view these kind of like, I would guess, backgrounds in 5th edition D&D, but they all come with a drawback, something that counts against you when you do things. But it's a nice little tweak that helps to individuate characters a little bit more. In my experience, though, players tend to remember their bonuses and forget their penalties, not maliciously, not to goob or to munchkin the game, but it's just that's what happens. And it's only really games like the old Deadlands version that manage to counter that kind of issue. As a games master, you can't be expected to remember absolutely everything about everybody's character. So some people, whether they mean to or not, can take advantage of that. But it's a nice little tweak. It's not artifacts, though. Scars are weirdly kind of developments for your group. You sort of accumulate scars by doing things or having things happen to you. They give you group goals. This is something I've complained about in other aspects of Degenesis, that binding a group together is difficult. Hypothetically, at least, this is something of a solution to that. It gives you ways to bind your group together and to have collective goals that align with the group and encourage the group to play together in a certain way. But the writing is clumsy and choppy, the same complaint that I've had previously about Degenesis products, and it seems needlessly complicated needlessly complicated as a way of doing that, and it doesn't make a great deal of sense on the written page. It might make more sense actually, stepping up and using the material, but it's hard enough to get a game of a massively popular non-dead game together, let alone Degenesis. So on the page, it doesn't seem that intuitive or easy or anything to use. So it's a bit of a problem for me. The next chapter is survival. So this is things like the food, drink, difficult terrain, difficult weather, and so on. The basics are covered well, food and water, that sort of thing, but the systems for dealing with some of the weather and so on are a bit scant and sketchy. Like the compensations that you get for wearing survival gear isn't particularly well set out, so you don't really know to what extent that will actually mitigate the problems. So for a post-apocalyptic setting, I think survival rules are higher in importance than they normally are, but I don't feel that quite covers it to the extent I would want it to, unfortunately, but there you go. The next chapter is health. So basically expanded and clarified rules on health and healing and the various forms of medical attention that you might be able to get, which obviously varies by tech level or artifacts or weird mysterious items from some of the cults and so on. So yeah, that's nice. I mean, it is a fairly gritty game, so the kind of healing that you can get isn't the kind of have a nap and get all your hit points back sort of thing. It is a bit more involved than that. So again, like the kind of survival mechanics, expanded and more detailed healing mechanics makes a sort of sense. So that was a welcome addition that I felt was good. We have combat as a section. So here we cover things like durability, some additional weapons and tactics and things, which is nice to have. Still not a great deal in terms of actual artifacts. The title of the book, excuse me. Energy is the next section. So here we talk about the capabilities for energy both before and after the apocalypse, what kind of energy is created and used in the post-apocalypse, and the leftover artifacts, in particular these sort of power cube things that tend to power everything. So it's useful, not necessarily detailed enough mechanically exactly, but it is still useful. So the main power sources are petroleum, oil, diesel and so on coming from the African continent, electrical cubes coming from the more technologically advanced cults, and coal fire, primarily used for forging and power generation in some of the holdover European states. Steam power is used in particular by some of the clans, so there's a brief bit about that. But if you're retaining that technology and applying it, I can't help but feel that the effects should be more widespread than they're presented in here. There's consequence to technology or magic when you introduce it into a game world, and in this setting it feels kind of artificially constricted in a lot of ways, that doesn't necessarily make a great deal of sense. The hodgepodge of technology that's kept and lost and so on doesn't necessarily hold together in a plausible way, which takes me out of the immersion in the setting, unfortunately. Economics, more details on how that all works, negotiating deals and so on for your characters, sort of levels of investment and so on. This is a good way to hang a group together around an enterprising Neo-Libyan merchant or something. So this is a sort of welcome set of rules if you wanted to play something a bit more upmarket, like a merchant caravan or a merchant adventurer sort of thing. You know, they have the money and the influence that could draw people together from the various cults and clans and country and cultures. So that's a good hook, but a fairly generic one. Now we actually get into some artifacts. In terms of the arsenal, we get more ammunition, a few more details on the different qualities of weapons, the modifications you can put into them, and we get a few new weapons as well, which was nice. Sorry, I'm not actually unwell, but my medication's bung up my head, unfortunately, so I apologise, but let's soldier on. Some of these weapons are interesting in their implications for the world and their rarity and so on. I mean, getting hold of an anti-material rifle and some ammunition in this world is kind of like getting a Vorpal sword or something in a fantasy game. So thinking about things in those terms, particularly sort of pre-apocalypse artifacts, it is interesting. Again, this is somewhat immersion breaking for me though, because look at the way we make things today. What is the world flooded with? It's flooded with cheap Chinese knockoffs of stuff that breaks really quickly and easily. So the idea that a material could last 500 years and still be operable in a future world that is only about 50 years ahead of ours, there would have to be a real massive sea change in manufacturing priorities and so on. But maybe there was a massive run-up in creating enduring materials before the apocalypse, based on how much warning they had, perhaps. So you can kind of overlook it, but it is a little bit... that's not how things work. Primal ingenuity is more about how the primer and the mutations operate, and how clans and others get into these mutants and extract useful stuff from them, like organs, chemicals, draw off blood, stuff that you can use by harvesting from these mutants, which is horribly grotesque, but obviously is something that people would do. Nose to tail dining, I suppose you might call it. So there's plenty of material on that, which I thought was very thematically appropriate. The descriptions and so on aren't as bad as they are in the other Degenesis books. It's not as much information to plough through. But it is still a bit lengthy and flowery when all you really need is the statistics and the facts. And then anything else is a bonus. I think they need to reverse their if they were still producing material, I think they need to reverse their priorities when it comes to communicating what they're trying to communicate. So what was this part? Oh, potentials. So potentials are like special abilities or feats, if you will, for the different cults and cultures. So here you get sort of expanded lists of things that you can learn from your particular cult. So that's nice to have. More character options is always nice to have. There was nothing that immediately leapt out as game breaking or anything, but it does allow you to make your particular character stand out a little bit more from the others, so that one judge is not the same as the other, one Spitalian is not the same as the other, and so on. So and this is mercifully short in terms of description and statistics and so on, so that's nice to have. So that's pretty much the same thing for each cult. As we go through, a bit short on the illustrations in this one, but still nicely presented. Do 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 None of this is artifacts, by the way. Please hold. Your gaming is important to us. Right. Now, this is a book called Artifacts, and here we are, chapter 11. Not that much of the book left, and we're going to be actually talking about artifacts. So, artifacts are the main things that are the leftovers from before. These are the rare remnants, these are the surviving scraps of the old world and the uses to which they can be put. So these are the magic items of the setting, I guess you could say. Most of this is older stuff, some of it is newer stuff to fit into the new post-apocalyptic world, but it's all stuff that you would otherwise think of as magic items in fantasy games. Laser weapons, EMP weapons, mind control devices, that sort of thing. Stuff that to us today is perhaps on the edge of our technological grasp, but in this post-apocalyptic world, stuff that is beyond anybody's grasp, even the enclaves of pre-apocalypse survivors. But there is definitely not enough in terms of artifacts, unfortunately. Memetics. Memes are a big part of the setting, I suppose. The pre-apocalyptics, the sleepers that are waking up and trying to manipulate society, use memetics. The Palers, the survivors of the Guardians of the Sleepers, they're steeped in memetics. And the cults themselves are the result of tailored memetics that have been spread in the post-apocalyptic societies to try and bootstrap civilization to come back. But this treats it more as almost a magic system for manipulating and controlling people, but that it makes sense within the setting. It makes sense in terms of the goals of several of the cults and factions. So it's a little bit needlessly complicated and not particularly well explained. Again, the translation gets in the way, but it's an important part of the setting that wasn't really gone into in enough depth in the original books. Excuse me. Then we get things actually laid out in a much more useful fashion. You know, what things are, what their statistical aspects are, and any particular notes and so on about them. So that's good. That's nice to see. One little aspect that tickled me was the use of black powder to produce energy. So basically running a crude internal combustion engine off black powder explosions. Why did that tickle me? Well, there's a Patrick Tilley book called Fade Out, where these weird devices appear all over the earth and start stopping electronics and electricity from working. And some of the last vehicles to run are basically using blasting caps to start big truck diesel motors. And then it becomes self-sustaining because you can't use the electricity to start them up. So yeah, that reminded me of that book, which is a good one, though the mystery is never really solved. But yeah, so you get your nice charts of everything, and an index that's more useful than in the other books, because this book is laid out in a more conventionally accessible way than a lot of the other material for Degenesis. So that's what you get, a book about artifacts with remarkably few artifacts in it, which is unfortunate, and a lot of material that is useful to a varying degree, but which is held back by the writing. That's unfair. The translation of the writing. that makes it harder to absorb and more difficult to read than might otherwise be the case. But this is the closest thing so far, I think, to a conventional source book. And I'm not one for convention, but certain conventions, particularly in technical writing and that sort of thing, effective communication, conventions are there for a reason. Okay, in terms of style, it's a bit more scant on the art and the design side, but that's actually almost a bonus in this book compared to the other Degenesis books. So a low 4 for style, or a mid 4 for style. In terms of substance, I mean, there's a lot of material here. It's not necessarily as usable as it otherwise could be, and the thing that it's titled to be is not what it is, which is a bit misleading. So I'm gonna be harsh because they put so much effort into everything that in terms of substance that feels like an omission in this one. The presentation of the substance, the misleading title, the difficulty in interpreting the things which are useful but are difficult, like the group goals and the memetics and so on. It's hypothetically useful, but there's a lot of barriers to entry because of the way it's presented. So in terms of substance, largely as a result of the accessibility of the substance, I'm going to knock it to a high 3. So that's 7 out of 10, 3.5 out of 5. It's still useful, but it is by no means an essential book for Degenesis. You could do without this one compared to the others. But there you go. Zang.
Pulp Nova is a collection of short stories in the old pulp style but with a modern twist. You should find something here you like, from western to mythos horror to science fiction. You can get Pulp Nova at Drive-Thru Fiction, on Amazon, or in hard copy from lulu.com.